Aloha and welcome. Welcome to Global Connections, part of the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast series. I'm your host, Carlos Juarez, and I'm delighted to welcome a special guest today. We're joined today by Bruenna Furtado de Oliveira. Bruenna is a Brazilian, young student who recently graduated here from Hawaii Pacific University, but she's returned back to Hawaii after a year of studying in Brussels, Belgium. And as we'll see, it's part of a lifelong of pursuing many different parts of the world. I like to think of her as a good example of a global citizen, always venturing into new parts of the world. And we're delighted to have her back here in Hawaii so she can share some of her insights. And so, Bruenna, thank you for joining me on Global Connections.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon. Good afternoon for everybody that is watching us.
Yes, and very excited. As I shared a minute ago, maybe tell us about yourself, because you're a Brasileira from Brazil,
yes.
But you've been in Hawaii some time. But most recently, you've returned from spending a year, an academic year, in Brussels, Belgium.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your background yourself.
Okay, I'm gonna just summarize really quickly, but I'm basically Brazilian. I was born and raised in Rio de Janeiro. My dad was Navy, so I kind of moved around Brazil. I lived in a couple other states like Amazon, Manaus, and Mato Grosso do Sul, which is another state which is borderlines Bolivia and Paraguay. And when I was about 19, 20 years old, I've always knew I wanted to go explore the world. I've always had that inside myself. So I left Brazil and I went to Lake Tahoe. I moved to Lake Tahoe because I had never seen snow. So I just wanted to see snow, and I was like, that would be a good experience. So.
And how did you choose? Was it just a twirl of the globe and your finger landed there, or how did you have a connection?
It was actually
some kind
of program.
Yeah,
exchange program, and then you had the experience, you had the options, and I even had Hawaii. I was in between Hawaii and Lake Tahoe, and then somebody told me Hawaii is really expensive and everything. I was like, okay, so maybe I should go see snow first. But Hawaii was already in the back of my head. So I went to Lake Tahoe, and it was a great experience. I learned how to snowboard. I worked as a ticket checker, in the snow, and it was great. And then after Lake Tahoe, I was supposed to just stay over there for 3 months and go back to Brazil. But guess what? I just found out I could apply for San Diego to study in San Diego. So I just took my car, I bought my car, drove down to San Diego, and I lived in San Diego for a year and a month, a year, 2 months, something like that. And I studied a little bit in San Diego, sports psychology. And after San Diego, I just decided to move to Hawaii. I was like, I've always wanted to go, so why not? So I came to Hawaii, and that's how everything started. I'm still here, I think,
And yet your journey has not ended, even though you've now had a base here for some time. You've also been venturing away and coming back.
Exactly. Well, ever since living in Hawaii, I visit a couple other countries, like Europe. I went to Europe in 2011, so I lived in Salamanca, Spain for about 2 months, 3 months, and I travel all over Europe as well. I also went to Cambodia with the
group study program here from Hawaii.
They study abroad from HPU. Yes, we went to Cambodia. It was an amazing experience. So came back to Hawaii, and in September last year, I decided to study in Brussels for a couple reasons. But I decided to finish my studies over there. So I just got back. It's been 2 weeks that I'm back. So.
Right, and reintegrating, and a lot of what we'll talk about, of course, just a little overview of these different experiences and what it's meant for you as a young adult and a global citizen in your own right. Because on one hand, you are Brasileira, you always will be, but now you're becoming kind of more interconnected in your own way.
That's funny. That's funny. That's a funny comment, because every time I go back to Brazil, I feel like I'm a little expatriated a little bit now, because my friends, they call me gringa, which means foreigner. Every time I go back to Brazil, you're such a gringa, because apparently I already do things from other places, because I've lived in other places. So it's like in every other place that I am, I'm not from there too. So I'm a little like.
But in a curious way, each of these different experiences you had, you're also absorbing some of that new culture, and it's helping shape your person, your identity. And maybe by way of the most recent experience, you've just come back from essentially Brussels, a fascinating city, because it is, on one level, it's kind of like the capital of the European Union. It's the center of many of the main headquarters of the EU itself, also the NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But just more than that, it's a real global international city. Describe a little bit to us. I mean, Brussels, Belgium's a relatively small country, but Brussels, what is it like as a city?
Well, first of all, I chose Brussels because I'm an international studies student.
Yeah.
I just graduated, so I was at the time. And I wanted to learn French because I've always been fascinated about French.
Mm-hmm.
But that wouldn't be because I even thought about Madagascar or France. So I was like, I can't go to either place. But then it combines with that Brussels is exactly the European capital, so everything is going on over there. You have the Parliament, the European Parliament, you have the European Commission, you have NATO, you have many international NGOs over there.
Yeah.
And it's really a good place to be if you're an international studies, international relations, or political science student. It's really a good place to be because you have a lot of opportunities over there. So French, that, and also to work, not just because Versailles College is really a good school over there in Brussels, also for international studies, but I would have the opportunity to work over there and get some work experience.
Yeah, some practical, and we'll speak to that as well. You were an intern with one of the embassies for Honduras, the Central American country, and maybe just talking a little bit about one of the challenges, I guess, of studying in other places. I mean, you chose to come and do your studies in the U.S. alone, and the notion of culture shock that we talk about, it's a very normal thing. You're out of your comfort zone, you're out of your normal routine, and, you face the challenges of just how do you do this, or why that, or even just the anxiety of, well, where am I, or who do you know? How was your own experience? Tell us about your own culture shock, anything from your first time in the U.S., but even the more recent experience in Belgium.
Well, I would say maybe the experience in Belgium, it's very different than Hawaii, completely different than Hawaii.
Yeah.
So, as far as I remember, when I first got over there, I thought, even at school, it's like they're more serious about it. Not that in Hawaii we don't take serious, but I feel that Hawaii things are a little bit more relaxing,
relaxed, of course.
And it's just the Hawaii style, Hawaii way. And I got a little bit about that from being Brazilian as well, or a little Brazilian way.
Yeah.
So over there, for example, we would go to take an exam or a test. We would have to put everything away, like cell phone, purses. You couldn't have anything around you.
Yeah.
And to me, that was really like, it was like, really, do we really need that? Because I mean, I never in Hawaii it was never like that, So I thought they were pretty strict at that. But I also understand that then I got used to it. I also understand it's a culture thing. And maybe at the supermarket, for example, I remember my first day going to the supermarket, and then we had to get a card, and I had to put a coin to get a card. And I was like, how am I supposed to already enter the supermarket and spend my euro? I don't even want to get a card, just carry everything in my hands and don't do that. But then my friend that was taking me, he told me, he was like, no, they give you back once you return the card. It's just a deposit. I was like, oh, okay, so I come down.
Challenge.
So those were one of the first experiences. And Brussels also, well, like Hawaii, but Hawaii I would say it's more Asian center. I mean, you see a lot of people from all over Asia or the Pacific.
Yes.
And over there, Brussels is very, I would say, like it's a very broad expat community, but it's from all over Europe.
Yeah.
So it's Europeans from
every
everywhere.
Corner,
they go to Brussels, and they go to work and they go to leave because it's really the center of Europe. It's pretty much the European capital. So it's. But I study with people. Versailles College also has a very international, just like how HBU, they have a very international student body. So I study with people from Tajikistan, from Namibia, from places in Europe, all over Europe. But that was funny because my class, it was only 2 people from Belgium.
The rest
and not even they were full Belgian. They were half Belgian, half something. All of us, we were from
it's
somewhere else.
It's a real global community
exactly.
there.
Any. I mean, I love it. I've been traveling. It's just I think my area, where I like to be.
And so in some ways, you came there prepared already as somebody that was you had good skills at working with different people. You'd seen part of the world, and that's true of I think many of those students there. But for somebody who might come from a very simple, homogeneous, everyone that looks the same, it could be more challenging, right?
For sure, absolutely. Because I feel that it's probably my passion.
Yes.
I like being in that environment. I like being challenged and just being in a culture that I know nothing, and then I got to figure out everything about it. And I feel like that's what moves me, But I would understand for somebody, especially coming from Hawaii, going to a big city in parts, because Brussels, I think it's about 1 million people, and we have 1 million people over here in Hawaii, on Oahu. But it's different. It's very, I mean, the culture is different. Everything, it's very different. They more, I mean, you don't walk around on the slippers, or, you know, like.
Yeah. So much more formal and traditional in some level. But the weather, of course, I mean, it tends to be, you know, while it has some warm summers, I mean, the weather's cool, it rains, it's, you know, a different way of dressing. But the other aspect, and I've had several opportunities to visit a beautiful city that it is, you can just see the rich heritage and the culture that they take it very, they you know, they take a lot of pride in, you know, the beauty of their, you know, built environment, the buildings, the churches. It's just quite astonishing. And that almost kind of humbles you just to see that and realize how rich that, you know, heritage is.
But I feel that all over Europe they have that. They have everywhere in Europe. It's kind of, they have a history, the history that dates back from so many centuries ago. And it's different. I mean, in Hawaii we still have that too, but I mean, in the mainland you don't have that much. You know, you see things from so far away. And I feel that in Europe you see churches, you see museums, and you just see a lot of history, and it's very rich over there. So it's really interesting too. I mean, just on your days off when you have nothing to do, you go see an exposition at the museum, or you go to the park and you sit at the park. It's a very different lifestyle. But it's, on the other hand, it's really interesting too. I mean, it was really amazing to have experienced that.
Yeah, excellent. No, and these are things that I think, you know, we live in a world now where it's a lot easier, and opportunities like what you pursued for education are one avenue. Of course, there's just simple travel, but it's not quite the same, because when you're living in a place, you really get immersed in that culture and the values, the way of life that you don't experience just as a tourist. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. One of the things I also want to, you know, get a sense from you of impressions that you have, because you became, you know, a resident in the U.S. You've been here now with permanent residency for some years. Now you've been away and you've come back, and that re-entry is another aspect of culture shock. When you come back to the world that you've known, but you might see it very differently. So we'll discuss that in a moment. I want to just remind our guests we're joined today by Bruenna Furtado de Oliveira, a young Brazilian from Rio, but really you're in many ways a Hawaiian now. This is your home, and you've come back after this great experience. We're going to continue our dialogue, talking with Bruenna, just to unravel some of the interesting, you know, Brazilian in Brussels, but really a global citizen, I would say. Great opportunity to learn, you know, what is it like to travel, and as we can vicariously through her. But, you know, some of the challenges, because travel is exciting and fun, but sometimes you run into some obstacles and to some frustrations and anxieties, and how do you overcome those? What are strategies or ways that you can kind of deal with the inevitable culture shock? And it's not just when you go to the place, but as we'll hear, when you come back, suddenly you're caught off guard a little bit. So stay tuned, and we'll come back in a moment with more on the story.
Aloha, my name is David Day, and I'm really interested in international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security, and that's why I host ThinkTech Global. I bring in guests from all over the world who know about these various issues in enormous depth and detail. Come learn with me every Thursday afternoon right here at 4 o'clock. I'll see you there.
Aloha and welcome. Welcome back. We're live and we're ThinkTech Hawaii. This is the show Global Connections, and I'm your host, Carlos Juarez. And we're having a great conversation today with Bruenna Furtado de Oliveira. Bruenna is a young Brazilian who's living in Hawaii now, but most recently got back from Brussels, Belgium, where she spent a year as an exchange student, basically finishing part of her studies there. And Bruenna, one of the things we were talking about, of course, you've been to these different countries and experienced the excitement of living and traveling and working and studying in another place. This notion of culture shock, some of it is when you go there, the kind of things you described, how things are done differently. But I want to talk a little bit about the sort of maybe the reverse or the re-entry culture shock. When you come back to place that was your home here a year ago, but what were some of the impressions or experiences you felt?
That's funny to talk about that, because I've had that first when I lived in the U.S. for 2 years before I went back for the first time in Brazil.
Yeah.
And it was a huge cultural shock, and it was, I think, the first time I really experienced that. Like, it was a culture that I knew about. It was a place that I really knew, really well. But then everything was weird. Even the Portuguese, like the people speaking, it would sound weird to me. And I've also experienced culture shock, but not as strong as that. But when I got back over here after living a year in Brussels, I also didn't expect, and he was from Brussels, a city in Belgium, which is like, very typical. The houses are very, very different than Hawaii, the bricks and everything. And then you go back to the North Shore, because I live on the North Shore, on the north side of Oahu. So it was just like, first of all, my friend picking me up from the airport, she was already the first thing. I didn't know I had changed so much. She's picking me up with small shorts, with a small top, aloha, bringing in lei. It was it was like awesome, great, but I felt a little different, just the warmth and everything, it was a little different. And then she's driving me back to the North Shore, and then I remember seeing just on Kamehameha Road, she's driving me back, and then people passing by with the surfboards and barefoot, and everyone just going surfing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was like, I feel like I'm completely different, now, because it's just like I'm not used to this anymore. And I didn't know I was gonna feel this way, but I did feel. I feel really weird. I felt really weird, but that took me about 3 days, 2 days, 3 days to get used to it. Because obviously I've been living in Hawaii for the past 5-6 years, so it's nothing that I don't know.
You could eventually reintegrate.
But that's why I didn't know I was gonna feel this way, and I felt really, really, really weird. And I was even telling my friend, I don't even want to see anybody. I feel like, I'm having a culture shock right now.
Kind of surreal a little bit.
Let me take it in, and assimilate everything, because it was completely different. And Belgium, it was very gray, very rainy, and a very different life. And then I come over here, sunny, and like people, going surfing and everything. But I mean, it's Hawaii. It's really not hard to get used to it. Yeah.
And one of the things that we can say about these experiences, traveling, studying, moving abroad, they are transformational. You're never quite the same person again. You see the world differently, and maybe some of what you described too, and even the experience going back to Brazil the first time, you often, I like to describe that you don't just learn about the place. You spend a year in Brussels, you learn all about that, but you learn about yourself, your values, you learn about your home and your home values, whether it's Brazil, whether it might be Hawaii today, so that this exchange and study and working abroad reorients your values. And specifically, there are things that maybe you thought were important, but they're not, or things that you didn't realize important, but they are, whether it's family or food. Are there things that you can think about that you, as you've gone through these changes, that you've learned about yourself, different things, ways you see the world, or things that are valuable to you, that matter to you, any way that it's given you insights?
I think that's exactly why I love so much traveling, and I love so much just living different places and meeting different people. That's exactly why, because you learn so much about yourself. You just by putting yourself out there, and just by dealing with different people, and the way that you're gonna see things that maybe the way you act is not, they're not gonna interpret it the same way people would interpret it in the place where you came from, or the place you were living before. So I think one of the things that I've learned from I guess being a traveler is just to be less judgmental about people's and people's way, of doing things, because I think you don't realize that until you actually immerse yourself in a different culture, and you see that you might be a different person, and the things you do might not be that normal as you thought it was before. So I feel that just by being a different person, and like I said, I go back to Brazil, and my friends, they think I'm different now, and I'm like, so just by experiencing that, I think I just see when people do something different, I try, obviously, I think it's in our human nature to, we always judge and things like that, but I try not taking that, I try to understand a little more before maybe I make a judgment, or maybe I make a conclusion of somebody's action.
Yeah, so that's a good way of describing it, because you realize that people do things differently, and it may not always be clear, but it helps you understand that, well, it's not like one is better than the other. It's a function of their values, their culture, their history, their context. I think it's also the case that these experiences taking you out of your comfort zone, what you know and what you think is the way it needs to be done, then makes you realize, well, wait, there's a different way that maybe, think twice about how you've been doing it. I wonder, as again, a Brazilian yourself, you're in Hawaii, and Hawaii, of course, has a pretty sizable Brazilian community here. and we have many who are connected even to the surf industry.
Yeah.
You know, many of the professional surfers themselves. But could you describe a little bit yourself now that you've been in Hawaii some time? Maybe what is this community here? And they're in many different areas. What brings them here? What keeps them here?
About Hawaii?
Yes.
I guess a Brazilian, California, Brussels a little bit, describing how I
Less
feel.
Brussels, though. I mean, you're probably fewer.
How I feel about Hawaii. I feel that Hawaii, I'm actually really, really glad I moved to Hawaii. I feel that that's the place that changed me most as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, that's because I'm born and raised, although I moved to other states in Brazil, I'm born and raised in Rio de Janeiro, which is a big city. It's like 7 million people, if I'm not wrong. And I'm used to the fast pace, and I grew up in that kind of, you gotta go to university, you gotta do your masters, and then English course, Spanish course, French course, and you gotta take all of this, all of that, and you don't stop. You shouldn't stop, And that's a little bit how I was raised. And that's the way I've always knew life, and I've always understood it. And it's funny because I lived in Lake Tahoe, and even though Lake Tahoe is a little less, but it's still, California and San Diego also, it's still, they still have a different way of view.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as I moved to Hawaii, I don't know if maybe I was just more open to accepting it, but it was like an abstinence at first. It was like, I moved to the North Shore. I remember even one of my first days, I remember looking at one of my friends was like, you guys don't do anything at night over here? There is really nothing going on, because I moved from San Diego, California, where everything was going on, to the North Shore, Hawaii. And I remember she looked at me, she was like, no, we go to sleep and we wake up early in the morning.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, and I remember, it was a bit different for me. But it was really good because I feel that what I've learned from living Hawaii for the past 5-6 years, I learned to slow down a little bit. Even though sometimes I gotta, remind myself that you gotta slow down. I just learned to put a little less pressure on me. Because, obviously you gotta do things. You gotta get your studies, and you gotta be good out there. But you also gotta enjoy life, and that's what we're here for.
Yeah,
and I feel that Hawaii, especially the North Shore, has, I feel like the North Shore, I always tell my friends, I feel that the North Shore, as long as you're surfing and you're a good surfer, no one's really questioning what are you doing, as long as you're good in the water, obviously it's not just like that, but I just feel, that lifestyle, that Hawaii aloha, that changed me a little bit, and I don't see life anymore with that pressure as I would see before, coming from a big city.
Yeah, and here there is a community of Brazilians. I mean, could you describe that a little bit? Well, I mean, others that you've met and know here. What brought them here? What keeps them here?
I feel that most Brazilians, obviously, I know Brazilians just for being Brazilian, because we always know the person that comes from our culture. But there are a lot of Brazilians on the North Shore, especially, and I feel that most of them, they come for the surfing, which is kind of known because they all come for the contest and everything, and Brazilians, they're also used to the tropical weather, so I feel that they all come to Hawaii because you're not gonna find. I always make jokes that you're not gonna find any in Wisconsin or up in in the cold places, but you're gonna find them in Hawaii and California. That's why I think there are so many of them, and plus it's a population of, I think we just reached 200 billion people. So you can see there are a lot of people, and the country is growing, the economy is growing, so they are all out there. So you can find Brazilians anywhere.
And as you were in Europe most recently, you were able to connect with communities there as well, in Brussels and elsewhere?
Yes, because as soon as I got in Brussels, it's completely different than Hawaii. So it wasn't anymore about surfing or skateboarding. So I was just like, what am I supposed to do over here? I need to do some sports. So I started jiu-jitsu over there, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And that connected me with the Brazilian community over there, and I even did some competitions, and I want to keep doing jiu-jitsu over here in Hawaii. I really love it. And that's how I connected with the Brazilian community over there. But that's a completely different community, the Brazilian community over there, than the one that lives over here.
Interesting. Now, we'll come back in a moment for our final segment, and what I want to talk about a little more is while you were there in Brussels, part of what you did was to connect with a very interesting internship opportunity, and because, again, we described it, here's a city that really is the capital of a lot of things happening in Europe, NGOs, government, EU, NATO, and you had a fascinating opportunity that I want you to describe this, to help provide a briefing on issues in Middle East and Syria.
Yes.
So as we come back for this final segment, we'll talk a little bit more about what was you were doing there in Brussels. We've been joined today by Bruenna Furtado de Oliveira, a Brazilian who is back in Hawaii, now her home for some years, after spending a very valuable year studying in Brussels, Belgium. She was there as a student at Vesalius College, which is a very interesting place, an English language university, a small college, and it's an exchange partner for us here in Hawaii with Hawaii Pacific University, but students come there from all over the world. And we'll talk about her experience there doing some interesting internships, and that's one of the attractions of a place like Brussels. NGOs, government agencies, the world community that is there, and opportunities for young students like her. So come back and join us for the final segment of our show here on Global Connections, part of the ThinkTech Hawaii series. We'll be back for more on the story.
I'm Jay Fidel. That's Sharon Moriwaki of the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum. And every Wednesday we have Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. We've been doing it for some time now, and we have some fantastic guests on there, unbelievable guests who give us insight into what is going on in a very complex, sometimes very confusing, sometimes very disappointing area of progress in the state. So we love doing this. We love meeting them. We love talking to them. We love having their ideas out on the table. So maybe, just maybe, we can all make some sense of what's going on. Sharon, what do you think?
I think it's absolutely correct. We enjoy ourselves meeting with all these people and hearing about the energy and the state of clean energy, and hopefully we advance clean energy for the state. So it's terrific. Join us.
Okay, it's every Wednesday. Okay, Wednesday is Energy Day. Every Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, here on ThinkTech Hawaii. We'll see you there.
Aloha, we're back and we're live. I'm your host, Carlos Juarez, here on Global Connections, and we're joined today by Bruenna. Bruenna is a Brazilian who's come back after spending a year in Brussels, Belgium, as a student there at Vesalius College, a recent graduate here of Hawaii Pacific University, where she earned her degree in international studies. And part of that, again, the experience of studying in a place like Brussels, a very important city in Northern Europe, capital city for the European Union itself, many of the main institutions of the EU, but also many NGOs, because this is a place, again, deeply connected to the world. And one of the things, Bruenna, that you did while there in Brussels, you had an opportunity. Well, first tell us about an internship you did with the Embassy of Honduras, Central America.
The mission of Honduras to the European Union.
The European Union. So what was that like?
So that was connected with the university that I went, with Vesalius University. So you even wrote me a recommendation letter so I could get the job. So I got the internship, and it was great because since it's EU, it's in Brussels. Everything is related to whatever is related to the EU, you know. So I had to research. It was actually 2013. So they were going through the presidential elections, the Honduras presidential elections. So I had to research a lot what the EU would think about, because they were gonna send missions over there to watch the elections to see if it was gonna be democratic and everything. So I had to do a lot of research what they would expect, you know, from these Latin America countries, you know, from experiences in Latin American countries, what they could expect over there in Honduras. Yeah. So I had to look at all Latin Americans and even South America countries, you know, to see what was the EU view when they went over there. They sent the mission and they saw what they criticized, what they thought it was good. So they were just trying to adjust and do a good job, actually. Yeah. So they could. Yeah, so you could give a good report about their election. So
So they had election observers going there, and in many ways, particularly for a country like Honduras, a fairly newer democracy, transitioning from a past that had a lot of more difficult authoritarian rule, and so something like the EU can, in some ways, provide an oversight and even help with some of the logistics of the election process itself. Yeah. But more importantly, provide sort of like in some ways a stamp of approval that it went well, it was clean, and beyond that, what does it mean, in terms of the outcome of the election relations with the EU? Because of course the European Union, as this collection now of 28 countries, they have a lot of connections to the developing world and providing assistance to countries like Honduras. And so you got to meet with some of the diplomats there from the Honduran mission itself.
I did.
And understand some of their views on it. And otherwise, kind of be a piece of this connection, Europe, Latin America. And from your vantage point as a Latin American yourself, I mean, able to really help make those connections. Now, another part of what you did, you had described, and I wanted you to maybe speak a little bit more about, you mentioned that you were involved as part of a class project, perhaps, involved more with the crisis in the Middle East, in Syria. Tell us about that.
Because we had, it was a capstone senior research class with Professor Coops, Dr. Coops.
Yeah.
And we had to actually research about the Syria civil war. We have the EAS, which is the European External Action Service, one of the European institutions over there. So pretty much Visayas College had a connection with the EAS. So the students, the senior students that were about to graduate, they were going to come up with a project where they were going to research in depth, and they were going to provide with a policy brief in how the EU should act in Syria with the Syria civil war. So we went to the EAS and we met the desk advisor officer, which was Maciel. He was a Polish person.
Yes.
And he provided us with 4 questions. So what the EU can do, how can the EU come with through Turkey, or how can the EU provide with humanitarian aid, and so my part was pretty much find out more about Lebanon, the relation between Lebanon, Syria, and the EU, how we could work that out. So it was really interesting, because I even want to now go to Lebanon. I wanted to go to the refugee camp and start,
because there are many Syrian refugees that are spilling into Lebanon in this
over,
case. Yes.
Nowadays, I think today, as of today, it's probably 1,500,000. 1,500,000
spread out in the neighboring countries. So.
And they have the Shia, the Sunni communities, and most of the refugees they are Sunni. So the kind of Lebanon is also a troubled country. I mean, not a troubled.
But having that many people presents a real challenge.
Exactly.
And because you have, of course, in the case of the European Union, they've got various roles in it. I mean, on one hand, they're providing a lot of the assistance to refugees and helping the country.
Exactly.
They're also trying to negotiate, and what is their proper role. So in effect, you had your hands in helping, carry out some of the diplomacy that's going on, some of the actual, current events. In this case, the Syrian, civil war, and it's so valuable because, we have diplomats in their formal position that do it, but you often benefit from having a fresh perspective, a new way of looking at these things. And one thing I know from my own experience working with students is they have a way of just cutting to the core, issue or looking at the crisis in this case from a new perspective that can really help inform even the traditional, let's say senior diplomats. So very exciting, again, an opportunity like that, you might study it in some other classroom in the abstract, but there you were in the European Union capital, briefing actual diplomats who are in fact doing this for their actual work.
And it was really interesting also that one of the conclusions that we came and we had to present to the desk officer. And a couple of days later, we saw on the newspaper that the EU was trying to work with this country that we gave the policy advising. And first of all, I found it really rewarding, to do this, because at first when you're researching about it, and especially with such a complicated topic, you're looking into Syria and you're like,
Where do you begin, or how do you make
you feel almost like giving up, I don't want to even, because it's really trouble, but and we came up with an idea that we're like, okay, they're gonna laugh at us, if we give this policy brief, because we were separate into groups, and my group, it was me and 3 more, so we were just, we were like, okay, but we're gonna work on this, and we researching that. We came with this conclusion, and we gave it in. And 3 days later, I'm not saying that it was our influence, but we were not, so far away from the conclusion. And 3 days later, we just saw in the newspaper that the EU was trying to work. In the case, it was Iran, so we were like, the EU and Iran, they're not going to work together, but then they were trying to work to try to settle the Syria conflict. And it was really rewarding, and it was really a great experience,
Yes. Oh, fascinating. And so again, in some small way, you helped to inform the decision makers, the policy makers who are involved in that, and must have been quite. I mean, must have made you feel just like, wow, I had a piece in some way to do with that.
Made me feel nervous. But
yeah, very practical though.
yeah.
But here again, it's taking you outside of the, let's say, the textbook classroom where you're actually involved hands-on and connecting to, again, the key people. Much like a student that might study in Washington D.C. or even doing an internship with our state government here, where you can actually get involved with policy in a direct way.
And I feel that that's a good way also for getting young people involved in such an important issue.
Yes.
And it becomes not just something, I mean, especially when you go over there. I say this because when I went to Cambodia with the study abroad program over here, I learned so much about Cambodia that if I feel like going back and maybe doing something about about everything that is going on over there. So I feel like this is a really good way to just get young people that they're gonna be out there. They're gonna build their careers. And someday, they might be in a position that they can make a big change.
That's right. Make a difference.
And that started in school, And I feel like every time I see an article about Syria and everything, I feel a little bit more expert about it.
Yes.
At first, on the first month, I was like, I don't even want to hear about Syria. Please don't even show me anything about Syria because I've read enough.
Overwhelming, too much information.
But it's still, even yesterday, I was reading about Syria, and it's something that it's already part of. It's part of my knowledge, and I want to know about it. I mean, it's interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah,
and it's also part of my career. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and you've had your hands in this type of thing, and what I want. I mean, I think our viewers obviously can see this too. I mean, we try to illustrate what are the ways that people can be involved in global issues, and 50, 100 years ago, you really had a world of just the traditional diplomats, just maybe the high business person. But we live in a world today where there are so many points of access. People can get involved. If you're in the nonprofit sector, maybe with an NGO that's involved with it, even as a student, you're actually having this direct impact, helping to brief policymakers. There really are many ways to connect and to be able to get involved. And I'm just pleased that the way you described that you suddenly feel you've had a piece of making history, or at least being a part of these very challenging global issues. And like you described Syria, I mean, very complex, no question about it, but little pieces of it are happening all at the same time, and you're contributing to a little bit of that. As we could, wind down our show for today, I mean, one of the things I'd like us to, maybe finish discussing a little bit is you've had these opportunities to now, move and experience living in other places, learn about other cultures and histories. What are the takeaways? What are the things that you think it's helped you? What kind of skills? I mean, you're a different person than you were at 18, when you left Brazil. What would you describe are some of the things that you have now under whether it's the way you see the world, the values you hold, how would you describe it?
Well, first of all, I feel that it's hard to say where is home when I have that question, where is home?
Well,
obviously Rio de Janeiro is always going to be,
your roots, your
where
home. Yeah.
where the family is and everything, where my Mona Lisa is for the moment. But I feel like Hawaii is home too. North Shore is home. Even Brussels, I could go back to Brussels and feel at home, So it's San Diego, and so
your ability to adapt to a new environment is very good skills.
I feel that I just learned how to be more resilient.
Yeah.
And I feel that once you're in a culture that you don't know anything, and obviously you're gonna go through challenges. And I always tell people that obviously I meet younger people than me. And sometimes they go through challenges, and I'm always like, yeah, I've been there, I've done a lot, and I mean, here I am, and I know nowadays I think I learned how to be, even though I still stress myself out, over things, but, I learned how to know that I'll be fine, and I know that everything in the end, it always works out for your best, and I've been accepting that more, that sometimes things happen for a reason, and then here I am.
Yeah.
Here I am back in Hawaii.
Yeah, and one of the things I think I've known you for some years now, and I think it's so critical, especially for young adults like you. You always have to be thinking a few steps ahead. You have some dreams, some goals. Someday you said to yourself, "Oh, I'm going to be in Hawaii. Maybe it's not this year or next, but it worked out." And likewise, you've got some dreams, some ideas now. You have to hold on to those and kind of keep it there as an aspiration. Someday I'll do that, and having had these various experiences, now you know that, hey, almost anything can happen. You may not have imagined, 5 years ago that you'd be in Brussels, Belgium, or in Cambodia, or in Hawaii, and yet your life suddenly opens up a lot of doors and opportunities. You described, I guess, some of the sort of skills of just, adaptability, resiliency, flexibility. Those are crucial. The others, as you've also described, learning to work with people from different parts of the world, and being open-minded. I mean, these are skills that we live in a world now where you don't even have to go to the world. The world will come to you. And the environment we're in now, people are coming. Of course, a place like Hawaii, we have tourists that come from all over, but even the people who choose to live here have come from somewhere. They bring their set of values and beliefs. And to succeed and to, survive, you need to work with different kinds of people, right? Any thoughts on that? The idea of how do you develop those skills?
I actually had an experience of that in my classrooms in Brussels, because he was just working, even with this project, the capstone project. He was just working with people from all over the world, and he was not one person from the same place.
Yes.
Everyone was from a different place. So I just noticed that me being a Brazilian / living in Hawaii, I'm not gonna say Hawaiian, but / having lived in Hawaii, have lived in California, so I don't say completely Brazilian, maybe a little bit of everything. Working with maybe somebody, as an example, from German. I had a best friend, Nadia, that she's German. And it's completely different than the way we're going to work, because she needs to have everything planned.
Very organized.
And I remember, I need to plan, otherwise I'm going to, it's not going to work. I'm like, calm down, we're going to go as it takes, we're going to
But like her, I mean, she comes from a world, again, maybe over stereotyping of the German, very organized and orderly.
Exactly.
But you bring a different set of values and interests, thinking outside the box, a lot of creative energy, and that helps enrich her. So it's this idea that, the diversity of views and values can come together, and your challenge is how do you contribute to it, and how do you help lead others and motivate others?
Exactly. And it was really great. Just every time you go live somewhere, you just either love a relationship, a friendship, you just, just dealing with different people from different culture. It amazes me, it's what I'm passionate about, and that's what I've been doing. And nowadays when people ask me, some people, they ask me now that I came back to Hawaii, so
now what?
Are you back in Hawaii for forever? I'm like, I'm even get goosebumps when I hear that word. I'm like, I don't work with that word,
That's right. I'm here now, and let's enjoy it.
Let's take it as it goes, and I don't know if that is a forever, because I feel that maybe someday I will settle down, but I feel that it is very addicting,
and you've opened, I guess, again, a lifestyle that you want to absorb more. There's more of the world to see, more to experience.
And then there's just so much out there that you're just like, I want to see it all. I want to experience it, and I just love it.
That's right. No, very well. Well, I'm so grateful that you've come back to share some of these thoughts, and for our listeners, again, a good example of a globally connected individual, Bruenna, our Brasileira, who comes to us from Brussels, but has obviously had a journey that has continued, and I know I look forward, and we'll bring you back as your next journey takes you somewhere else. But thank you as well, our listeners, for joining us here on Global Connections, part of our ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast series here. We come to you live from the heart of downtown Honolulu at the Pioneer Plaza Studios. Joining me today, Bruenna Furtado de Oliveira, and want to thank you for joining us as well. Hope you've come away with some good insights and inspired you to also reach out and connect more to our world. Again, Global Connections, join us again next week. We'll be back every Thursday from 2 to 3, 2 to 2:45. And you can see all of our shows as well on YouTube. Share them with others. Thank you for joining us. Aloha.